Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're jumping into the world of corporate governance to put a spotlight on a role that is absolutely critical, but honestly often flies under the radar. I'm talking about the independent director. So, what's their whole deal? Let's get into it. It's a huge question, right? You've got these massive corporations, powerful CEOs, and management teams that have been there forever. So who's sitting in that boardroom asking the really tough questions? Who's looking out for everyone else? Well, a huge part of that answer is the independent director. So in this explainer, we're going to tackle 5 key areas. We'll start with why this role even exists, the corporate watchdog. Then we'll look at the basic rules of the game. After that, we'll see what happens when those rules get even tougher. We'll also pinpoint where these directors have real, actual power. And finally, we'll look at the pressures that can threaten their independence. Okay, first up, the corporate watchdog. To really get what these directors do, you have to understand the why behind the role. Why was this position even created in the first place?
A great way to think about them is as the board's conscience. Their job isn't to be in the weeds of daily operations. Nope, it's to be that objective, impartial voice that represents everybody with a stake in the company. We're talking shareholders, employees, customers, and to make sure the board isn't just a rubber stamp for whatever the CEO wants.
And here's the official lingo. The key phrases to lock onto are non-executive, which just means they're not part of the day-to-day management team, and no material or pecuniary relationship. In plain English, they can't have any significant financial ties to the company that could mess with their judgment.
Now, this role isn't just a nice idea or a best practice, it's actually the law. So let's dig into the foundational rules, which are laid out in India's Companies Act of 2013.
Section 149 of the Act makes it super clear. For the companies this applies to, the board has to have an absolute minimum of 2 independent directors. No ifs, ands, or buts. And their time on the board is limited. An individual can't just hang around forever as an independent director. The max tenure at any single company is 10 years. And why is that? Well, it's to make sure there are always fresh eyes and new perspectives, and to stop them from getting a little too cozy with management over time. And this shows you exactly how that tenure clock works. It's broken down into 2 terms back-to-back, 5 years each. But once you hit that 10-year mark, you're out. You have to take a mandatory 3-year cooling-off period before you could even be considered to come back to that same company. Okay, but what about companies that are traded on the stock market? Well, for them, the rules get even tougher. This is where SEB, the securities regulator, comes in to add another layer of protection, this time for all the public investors. And here's a super important rule to remember. If there's ever a conflict between the Companies Act and SEBI's regulations for a listed company, guess who wins? SEBI, every time. Their rules are considered the higher standard. They prevail. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because the number of independent directors you need actually changes depending on who's running the show. If the chairperson is an executive or one of the company's founders, you need a strong counterbalance. So at least half the board, 50%, has to be independent. But if the chair is non-executive, that requirement drops to 1/3. And when you're doing the math, there's no room for ambiguity. Let's say a board of 10 people needs 1/3 to be independent. Well, that's 3.33. You can't have 1/3 of a person, right? So the law says you must round up to the next whole number. That means 4 independent directors, not 3. The rule is simple and it's golden. Always, always round up. So we know who they are and what the rules are, but where do these directors actually use their influence? Well, the answer is in the board's key committees. These are the real engines of corporate governance. Let's start with the big one, the Audit Committee. This committee oversees all the financial reporting and internal controls. And the rules here are ironclad. At least 2/3 of its members must be independent directors. That's a supermajority, and it's designed to guarantee impartial oversight of the company's money. Then you've got the NRC, which stands for the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. This is the group that decides who gets appointed to top jobs, and crucially, how much they get paid. As you can imagine, to avoid any conflicts of interest, a majority, that's more than half, of its members have to be independent. And this slide really drives the point home. It's not enough for independent directors to just be members of these powerful committees. For the 3 most critical ones, Audit, NRC, and the Stakeholder Relationship Committee, the chairperson must be an independent director. They're the ones setting the agenda and leading the discussion. They're in the driver's seat. So the rules look pretty solid on paper, don't they? But what happens when we take these rules out of the textbook and into the messy, real world of business? What are the things that actually threaten this independence we've been talking about?
One of the biggest threats is something called a consultancy relationship. This is when a director, or maybe a firm they're connected with, is also getting paid by the company for advice or other services. Even if everyone has the best intentions, that financial link automatically creates a potential conflict of interest.
In fact, a lot of experts will tell you this is the single biggest threat out there. And why is that? Because it totally blurs the line between being an objective overseer and being a paid vendor. It just gets a lot harder to challenge management when they're also your client, right?
So if you ever need to quickly figure out the right board composition for a company, here's a simple 3-step mental checklist for you. First, ask, is the company listed? That tells you that SEBI's rules are the ones that matter most. Second, look at the chairperson to figure out if you need the 50% or the 1/3 rule. And third, remember the golden rule. Always, always round those fractions up.
All right, let's do a quick-fire recap of the most important takeaways. Remember the 10-year limit, 10 years max, then a 3-year cooling-off period. For listed companies, SEBI's rules are supreme. Board composition hinges on the chair. 50% for an exec chair, 1/3 for a non-exec. And you always round the fractions up. And remember, independent directors have to dominate the audit committee with a 2/3 majority, and they have to chair all the key committees. And finally, always be on the lookout for those consultancy relationships, because they are a huge threat to the whole system.
And we'll end on this final thought. We've got all these rules and regulations all designed to build this wall of independence. But in today's world, with all its complex professional and social networks, can anyone ever be truly 100% free from any and all influence? It's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.